Humans sense and process a variety of sensory stimuli before the brain initiates a series of complex responses. The actions of other organisms are no less complex, whether feeding, watching out for predators, or doing a courtship dance. All organisms attempt to maintain homeostasis in their internal environments, despite changes that may occur in their external environments. Receptors in the nervous system assist in the maintenance of homeostasis by monitoring both internal and external environments.
In this program, we will be discussing how different parts of the peripheral nervous system function and how the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system regulate involuntary function and maintain homeostasis. We will also look at how biofeedback and a polygraph work, as well as current research in nerve growth.
By the end of this program, you're going to understand how the body transmits information from sensory receptors to the spinal cord and the brain, and how these structures in turn relay motor messages to the muscles and glands for action.
It looks like you've done a nice job of placing the parts of the nervous system on this diagram. Could you explain it to me?
Oh, sure. We divided the nervous system into two main areas: the central nervous system with the brain and spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system.
The sensory information is taken from the senses to the spinal cord and then up to the brain. Then it goes from the brain via the spinal cord to the muscles and glands.
Good.
But we're still not sure where the autonomic nervous system fits into all of this.
Actually, it fits quite nicely under the motor division, where you've got it. It's responsible for controlling our involuntary responses, whereas the somatic motor division is responsible for controlling our voluntary responses. Now, let's take a closer look at the peripheral nervous system.
The peripheral nervous system consists of 12 pairs of cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. These nerves connect the sensory receptors to the brain and the spinal cord. They also connect the brain and the spinal cord to the muscles and glands. Most of these nerves are called mixed nerves because they consist of both sensory and motor nerve fibers. Some are sensory nerves, and a few are motor nerves. Sensory receptors are located in joints, muscles, and all internal organs. Others are located in the skin and in special sense organs like the nose, tongue, eyes, and ears. When these receptors are stimulated, sensory nerves send impulses to the spinal cord and the brain. Some sensations from internal organs cannot be felt, and therefore we are not aware of the resulting action. These actions are important in maintaining homeostasis of body systems. For example, a person who has been standing in one position for a long time may faint due to insufficient blood flow to the head. Being in a horizontal position allows the blood to flow from the legs to the brain again and restores consciousness. Motor nerves carry nerve impulses from the brain and the spinal cord to the muscles and glands. There are two categories of motor nerves, those forming the somatic nervous system and those forming the autonomic nervous system. We have voluntary control over somatic nerves, which carry nerve impulses to skeletal muscles. However, we have little or no conscious control over the autonomic nervous system. Therefore, responses controlled by the autonomic nervous system are said to be involuntary.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this. The peripheral nervous system consists of 12 pairs of cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves.
And some are sensory, a few are motor, but most of them are mixed nerves.
Good. Our diagram is more of a functional organization of the peripheral nervous system as opposed to a structural one. However, when we talk a little later on about the autonomic nervous system, you'll see some structural differences between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. But right now, I'd like to have a look at the importance of maintaining flow
of sensory information from receptors to the spinal cord and to the brain.
So, why is it that without this flow of information to the brain, it starts to do funny things like hallucinate?
Well, think of what the brain is there for. It's there to constantly receive information from all parts of the body, from all our senses. It's used to doing that. There are these oscillations that are going on in the brain all the time, nerve cells being active. And we learn about the outside world by how these oscillations are affected by incoming inputs from our senses. If all of these were shut off all of a sudden, the brain is going to say, what's going on? It doesn't know how to react to that. It has never experienced that in the whole life of the organism. Input is constantly coming in. So once we stop that, the brain has no way to judge that against anything else it has ever experienced. And so the signals that would be coming in, we would interpret just in a crazy way. That's why we would begin to hallucinate. Because at every moment, at every time, the brain is constantly receiving input. Even if we're not aware of it, we're still getting lots of input from all parts of our body to the brain at all times, even when we sleep.
What would happen if you put me in a room that deprived me of my senses of sight and hearing? What would happen then?
Well, I think initially you would be very disoriented, but after a while you might be able to adapt to it. The brain is also a very plastic organ, and that is, it can change. It knows how that it has to react differently. So for instance, we have some snails over here that we're trying to grow where they never ever experienced something that every other snail in the world has always experienced. That is, going up to the surface and seeing what the atmosphere looks like. These snails don't know what's going on. So what we want to do is to see, gee, how does their nervous system change? A similar sort of thing was done on me once, an experiment. I wore goggles that reversed the world. And for the first little bit, I had no idea what was going up, which way was up, which way was down. We were sick to our stomachs. But after about a month, we realized, or our brain realized, that the world was now different and we could function. The interesting thing is, when we took those goggles off, it took us another month to learn about the real world again. So we are dealing with something that's very plastic. I mean, that's why we can learn. That's why we go to school, is to make what's in here different. And yeah.
So what happens to a person that's actually blind?
Well, there are different areas that are given over to vision, to hearing. And when a person would be blind, that area is no longer taken up by the visual system. I mean, you can think about, occasionally an animal or a human being may lose a finger or something like that. If we went and looked at the brain, we'd find that part of the brain that was supposed to be taking care of that finger no longer takes care of that finger. Some other finger or some other limb may take over that part of brain function. So again, we go back to this whole idea of plasticity, that the nervous system is something that's constantly changing. As inputs come in, they may be taking over greater areas or shrinking, taking over less areas. So that's something that is difficult to understand sometimes, that we're not dealing with something static. We're dealing with something that's changing all the time.
Right.
So, what happens to nerves that are damaged or cut?
Yeah, like this old scar on my finger where I almost cut the tip off. If I run my fingernail lightly over the scar, it feels strange.
What do you mean by strange?
Well, in some places I don't seem to feel anything.
That's because of nerve regeneration.
So once you have injured or you cut yourself, the scar may heal, but the wiring that takes place between your body tissue and the brain is cut, and that takes much longer time to heal and to recover and to provide the functional recovery. Artificially simulating what happens during nerve injury. So you cut the nerve, or in this particular case, a neurite, and then you like to observe the behavior of a growth cone. You can see that both ends are capable of extending and elongating their processes. Over the time course, they will extend and reach out to each other and eventually reunite. And we hope to use this system to repair the nerve injury by grafting these little pieces of nerve in between and letting them to grow and basically bridge the gap between the muscle and the cut nerve. What we have learned is that if a nerve that is severed and cut from its muscle, if the cut takes place very close to the muscle, then the nerve will regenerate. But if the cut has taken place far away, for example, you're looking at the leg muscle and then you have injury in the spinal cord. Now the muscle has a great difficulty surviving without a nerve. So during the time that they will take to grow and bridge the gap all the way, the muscle may degenerate. So what we're trying to do is that we're trying to find trophic molecules by which we can get the brain cells to survive without the muscle. Now what we believe and what our current understanding is that the trophic molecule will bind to the surface receptor on the brain cell. And this is then pulled inside the cell and internalized, where it activates a number of messenger molecules, which will enter the nucleus and instruct the nucleus that the proteins are required for the outgrowth. So the nucleus then turns on the regeneration machinery, which will then send appropriate messenger molecules, and this is how the brain cell is now capable of extending its processes. So the trophic molecules in that respect play a very, very important role. And similarly, by stimulating the muscle electrically, giving it an impression that it is still innervated, and what we're trying to do is to bridge this gap. And this will allow us to get the injured nerve regenerate, survive, whereas the muscle is also alive. And eventually we should be able to hook them both up. So we think that there is great hope in the future.
When neurosurgeons align severed nerves, it's almost impossible to achieve precise nerve fiber realignment with effector tissue. Consequently, the brain may send a message to the wrong muscle fibers. Complete recovery of stimulus-response coordination often requires retraining the nervous system.
If a nerve in the peripheral nervous system is cut or damaged, the axons and myelin sheaths begin to disintegrate. This disintegration continues throughout the entire length of the axons, from the site of injury to the effector organs. Phagocytic white blood cells move to the site of the injury, engulfing and removing cellular debris. Schwann cells also migrate to the site of the injury. After about a week, small sprouts from the remaining undamaged axons begin to grow and are guided to the effector organs by the Schwann cells. The growing axon extends to the effector organ, and the Schwann cells grow around the newly formed axon. This process takes about 2 weeks, after which nerve function is usually restored to normal.
So, Sarah, why don't you have normal feeling where your scar is?
Well, if I damaged a motor nerve, my problem would be with muscle movement. But since my problem's a lack of sensation, I could have damaged the sensory nerve fibers.
And it could be that the sensory receptors for touch might be damaged or destroyed.
That's good, Cam. If the cut were just superficial, it's unlikely that the sensory nerve tracts were severed. A deep cut would probably have severed the nerve, and it could have regenerated. Though it's probably more likely that there are fewer sensory receptors now than there were before. Let's see if we understand this. Hypothetical situation. Remember these nerves? Let's say these severed nerves would be switched and then reattached, like that. What would this person feel if they stubbed their big toe?
Well, they'd still feel pain in the big toe, wouldn't they?
No, I don't think so, because if we check the diagram closely, we've reattached the sensory nerve in the big toe with the sensory nerve of the little toe.
Okay, I understand. So sensory information from the big toe is connected to a nerve, which is then attached to the part of the brain that allows us to feel information from the little toe.
That's it.
So if we stubbed our big toe, it would feel like we just stubbed our little toe.
That's good. What does that tell us about the peripheral and central nervous systems?
Well, I guess it shows that we feel sensation with our brain, rather than the part of the body that's being stimulated.
When we injure a part of our body, we favor or protect it. This allows time for the injury to heal.
I suppose it would be the same with the motor nerve if we reverse two of those.
That's right.
Biofeedback's a technique that's been developed to help people learn how to control their physiological responses. In particular, it's usually used to help people learn how to control the autonomic nervous system. So it provides you with information about some kind of change in your physiological system that helps you to learn how to bring those changes under better control. Biofeedback is used for a variety of different applications. It's been used for some very specific disorders, things like migraine headaches, or in some cases gastrointestinal problems, or muscular problems. So sometimes when particular physiological systems have gotten out of control, you can use biofeedback to help a person learn to bring them back under control. But its widest application, I think, is in helping people learn how to relax. Your autonomic nervous system is a manifestation of your state of relaxation. If you're calm, your autonomic nervous system is calm. If you're aroused and tense, your autonomic nervous system is tense. And people can learn biofeedback or use biofeedback to learn how to bring that system under better control and learn how to relax. In a way, I guess you could draw an analogy to what a student does in class. How does a student learn handwriting? They do it over and over and over again, and they get feedback each time. If the letter looks right, they know that what they did was correct. If the letter looks wrong, they know that what they did was not correct. And so by an iterative process, a process of doing it over and over again, you learn how to bring it under the control that you want. The same thing seems to operate in biofeedback. You do something, the biofeedback instrument shows you what you did, and your brain interprets that as correct or incorrect.
What other parts of the peripheral nervous system do we still have to examine?
Well, we've taken a look at the sensory and the voluntary motor division, so I guess that just leaves us with the autonomic nervous system.
The autonomic nervous system is divided into two branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Both branches consist of motor nerves that extend from the brain and the spinal cord to muscles and glands. Unlike the sensory somatic nervous system, control over the actions of these effectors is for the most part involuntary. Structurally, there are two main differences between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems: their origin in the central nervous system and the location of ganglia. The neurons of the sympathetic nervous system originate in the middle region of the spinal cord and connect with a chain of ganglia that lie parallel to it. The neurons of the parasympathetic system originate in the brain and the lower part of the spinal cord. Unlike the sympathetic system, the parasympathetic nerves do not have a chain of ganglia. The actions of the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems oppose one another. In emergencies, the sympathetic system prepares the body for action and release of energy. The pupils dilate. The respiratory tract, heart, liver, and adrenal glands are stimulated. Organs of the digestive and urinary systems are inhibited. By contrast, the parasympathetic system constricts the pupils and conserves energy. It stimulates the digestive and urinary organs and inhibits the heart and respiratory tract.
The sympathetic nervous system stimulates sensory and visceral organs during fight, fright, or flight reactions. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, restores homeostasis in these organs. The brain receives information from both systems and tries to maintain a balance between them. Occasionally, during intense activity, sympathetic actions are interspersed with short bursts of parasympathetic responses. For example, anyone who has done any public speaking will be familiar with dry mouth. 1 minute, the sympathetic system prevents salivation, and the next minute, the parasympathetic system stimulates a sudden flow of saliva.
Here's a situation that we're going to use to help us with our discussion of the sympathetic nervous system.
Keep looking right out there. 3, 2, 1, bunting! Here she comes.
Now, what type of responses do you think are going on in her body during this kind of activity?
Well, why don't you come with me over to the board here and I can show you?
Sure.
Well, Her pupils would be dilated, just so that she could see exactly how far down she was about to fall, and she'd be breathing faster, and her respiratory tract would be dilated.
Yeah, and why would that be so important?
Well, when you're excited, your body needs a lot of energy, so you need plenty of oxygen for cellular respiration.
Oh, and plus, her heart would be beating a lot faster, too, just so that the glucose and oxygen could get to her muscles as quickly as possible.
Good. Could there be anything else happening inside her body?
She could be sweating and have a flushed appearance.
Can you relate that back to cellular respiration, too?
Well, muscle activity uses glucose and oxygen. As a result, energy, carbon dioxide, heat, and water are released. When perspiration evaporates from the skin, it cools you down. This helps prevent overheating.
And what about the flushed appearance?
Well, the red appearance in your face and in your neck is caused by dilating capillaries just under your skin. That also helps us to release excess heat.
What about adrenaline? Doesn't that flow through your blood when you're frightened or excited?
Good. Adrenaline, or epinephrine, stimulates the liver to secrete glucose into the bloodstream. The extra energy goes to active tissues in your body. Now, what about the organs of the digestive system or the urinary system? What role do you think they would play?
Well, wouldn't they slow down? Because blood would be taken from them to be used in the muscles.
Good. Food isn't digested and delivered to the digestive tract as quickly as it might be during a parasympathetic response in the body.
Boy, there's a lot that happens with our bodies that we aren't consciously aware of.
You got that right. Now, do you think you could come up with 2 more examples for me?
Well, when you're making a speech, your palms get sweaty.
Now, that's a good point.
And this once when I was driving, I got pulled over by the police. It was just for something minor, but my heart was sure pounding.
Well, that's a good example, too. Law enforcement agencies actually use something called a polygraph, or lie detector, and this helps them to measure sympathetic activity.
Cassie, what we're going to do is we're going to conduct a test. I'm going to get you to lie to me intentionally. The way I'm going to do that is I have several numbers here. They're all different, as you can see. I'm going to get you to pick one of these numbers. I don't want you to show me, and I don't want you to tell me which number you've picked. Because what we're going to do when I conduct this test is I'm going to ask you, did you pick number so-and-so, till I've gone through each and every one of these numbers. I want you to say no to every number, even the one you picked, because a certain number of times when I ask you about the number, you're going to be telling the truth. When I ask you about the number you picked, and you say no, what are you doing?
You're lying.
Bingo. Okay.
Okay.
Just pick any of those numbers at all. Okay. All right. Just stick that in there somewhere. Excellent. Now, you didn't forget the number you picked, right?
No.
Okay. You're thinking about it?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
So what does a polygraph do?
Well, a polygraph is an instrument. It's a recorder. It records things. And we use it as an investigative tool.
How does it work?
Human beings have 2 sets of nerves that kind of control or regulate their bodily functions. You have a voluntary nervous system and an involuntary nervous system. Now, the voluntary nervous system is the one that you use, the one that you control and tell when to work and when not to. You're using it right now to nod your head. I don't use the voluntary nervous system as a polygraph examiner. I use a system that you can't control. The involuntary nervous system are the ones sometimes referred to as the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system is the one that also controls the major muscles and organs in our body. Now, the primary organ or muscle that I'm interested in as a polygraph examiner is, in fact, your heart. And the reason I'm interested in your heart is that when a human being knowingly tells a lie, and knowingly is the key word, because if we say something we don't know it to be true or not true, it isn't going to bother us or affect us. But when we know it's a lie, our heart will automatically rebel against us doing that because we've been taught or conditioned to know that it's wrong to lie. So when we do lie, we know we may sort of suffer some sort of consequence. Now, the body will protect itself. It sets into gear or into motion one of the things that we have in our body that will protect us, and that's called or referred to as the fight-or-flight syndrome. You've probably heard of the fight-or-flight syndrome. Yeah, and the fight-or-flight syndrome, like I say, will be activated at times the body would sense danger or is threatened in some manner. So when we tell a lie and fight-or-flight is activated, all fight-or-flight is we have a gland in our body called the adrenal gland. It will secrete adrenaline into our blood. Blood goes to our heart and pumps blood all through our body. Now, when it's carrying adrenaline, things will change physiologically, brought on by fear of detection or fear of consequence when we tell a lie. Mm-hmm. Okay, Kasia, what we're going to do right now is we're going to conduct the test. Now, you remember the number you picked?
Mm-hmm.
You remember what we're going to do here? I'm going to ask you about all those numbers, and I want you to answer no to every number I ask you about, including the one you picked, the one you're thinking about right now. Okay? And what I'd like you to do is put your feet flat on the floor, just kind of relax, close your eyes, and we'll start the test. Okay. Test is about to begin. I'd like you to concentrate on the questions I'm now going to ask you. Did you pick number 16?
No.
Did you pick number 8?
No.
Was the number you picked number 13?
No.
Was the number you picked number 10?
No.
Was the number you picked number 3?
No.
Was the number you picked number 5?
No.
Was the number you picked number 7?
No.
Test is about to conclude. I'd like you to remain perfectly still for a couple of minutes.
Parasympathetic activities are, for the most part, opposite of sympathetic actions. For example, blood from inactive skeletal muscles is shunted away to the digestive and urinary systems. Consequently, digestion and urine production increase. It's important to understand that most of the time, our bodies are in a state of physiological calm. It's only during times of aggression, excitement, or fear that sympathetic activities increase.
Incredible. Well, now I can't feel my arms or my legs. It's like nothing you've ever experienced. Oh, wow. I can't even talk. I didn't know which direction I was going. It was just up and down and all around, and that was scary. Total loss of direction. Like adrenaline rush, totally.
With all its complexity, the human brain would not function without its connection to the outside world. The peripheral nervous system provides this connection by sending sensory information from our internal and external environments to the central nervous system. It, in turn, directs impulses via motor nerves to the appropriate muscles and glands for actions necessary to our survival. Impulses are also carried by the autonomic nerves to internal organs to maintain homeostasis.